All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Eating Disorders in Children and Teens. We're very happy to have you with us today, and I would like to introduce our presenter. So Katie Mackey has a bachelor's in science and nursing and is a registered nurse, is the mother of three young adult children. Her middle daughter was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa at the age of 10 in the fall of 2010. Throughout the years of battling the eating disorder and beyond, Katie has been a very active peer mentor and advocate for families navigating an eating disorder diagnosis. She has been published multiple times in feasted.org, as well as done multiple educational presentations on eating disorders for both medical staff and school staff. She lives in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan with her husband of 28 years. All right. Good morning, Katie, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Good morning. Thank you. Okay, so I want all the parents that are on here today to go into this right now with a very open mind in understanding that everything you ever thought you knew about eating disorders is probably not true. We all grew up watching after school specials on, like Karen Carpenter and the stereotypical, skinny white girl who wants to be, a model or whatever. And that is absolutely not how eating disorders work whatsoever. So I'm going to hopefully give you more of an understanding of our current science of eating disorders, what we understand about them. And also after that, I want to talk to you guys about how you can work with the school if you have a child with an eating disorder. So I'll start by telling you kind of my story, so you get a little synopsis of my family's struggle. So my daughter was diagnosed with anorexia when she was 10 and a half years old. It was in the early fall of 5th grade. On the last day of school in 3rd grade, so she would have been just turned 9, she came home, and I didn't know this at the time, but later on when I went through her journals, she kept a journal. On the last day of school, it said, "My goal for the summer is to stop eating junk food and exercise more." And then talked about how in the anti-obesity program in school, that's what they talked about. Also, they had like posters on the wall in her school the next year that said like, "Go foods," right? Like fruits and vegetables. Slow foods were like bread, milk, and then whoa foods, which were, pizza, donuts, etc. And I'll get into this more later, but all of this messaging had a really impactful, it had a big impact on my daughter. And kids who are kind of predispositions to be people pleasers, type A personalities, they take that being told, you're a good kid if you eat healthy and you exercise more. Well, she ran with it. So also at the time, I had done Weight Watchers and had lost like 35 pounds, and I was running and I was lifting weights, and I was in the best shape of my life, to be honest. And so when my daughter was starting to get sick and diagnosed with ED, I very much felt like it was my fault. Like I had somehow modeled, those behaviors to her. And I now know that that wasn't my fault. I never taught my daughter to starve herself. But it was a good lesson for me. And all I can tell you is that after going through all of this, I am now cured of all of the BS of the diet industry and all the body image things that we're all taught our whole lives, in this, especially in the United States. So anyway, my daughter started to like be constantly doing jumping jacks and jumping on the trampoline. And at first you just think she's, she's 9 years old, she's just playing. And I didn't think a lot of it. She stopped eating like Doritos, potato chips, things she considered junk food. And at the time, I was like, okay, great. Like, that's awesome. My kid is eating healthy. And if I look back now, after the fact, those were the first signs that something wasn't right. Like when your 9-year-old child goes to a birthday party and they won't eat a piece of the birthday cake or the ice cream, that's not normal. That's a problem. So there's little red flags along the way that if I only knew then what I know now, I would have intervened much earlier, but it's very insidious and it's very sort of slow. It trickle in the beginning until it wasn't. So anyway, she started to slowly run out or cut out foods, like I said, and it got worse and worse. And then like the summer before 5th grade, she's like scraping cheese off her pizza. She would not eat a lot, say, I'm full, my stomach hurts. I already, and then lying, like I already ate at my friend's house. They had a pizza party after practice and I already ate, Mom, things like that. And I also want to make it very clear that when I say the word lying, what I'm telling you is that when a kid has an eating disorder, good kids, quote unquote, will lie, cheat, and steal for this eating disorder. It takes over their brain and it becomes like a constant bully in their brain, threatening them. It's a never-ending loop. So it's not the child who is lying to you, it's the eating disorder making them keep it secret, if that makes sense. So one night in the late summer before 5th grade in the early fall, we heard a bunch of noise at like 4 o'clock in the morning. And I went downstairs to find my daughter exercising in her closet at 4 o'clock in the morning. She was covered in sweat, doing crunches, bawling her head off. And she just said, this thing in my head keeps telling me I'm lazy if I lay down. I have to move all the time. She was absolutely terrified. And that was the kind of the moment with the light bulb where we were like, oh my God, something is horribly wrong. We knew something was wrong, but this was like the nail in the coffin that something was really bad. So long story short, we ended up bringing her to a dietitian who actually was wonderful, which is kind of rare sometimes in the dietitian field to find someone who understands eating disorders. And she said, I have a challenge for you guys. Take her home. It was October at the time, and have her eat one of her favorite Halloween candies. And for my daughter, it was Starburst. So we went home, got out a Starburst, and it took my daughter 3 hours of absolute terror and hysteria to eat one Starburst. And then we knew, again, we were in really big trouble. We ended up taking her to a physician. She was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa. At the time, to be brutally honest with you all, I completely lost my confidence in myself as a mother. I couldn't believe that I let this happen under my watch. I felt extreme guilt. I just felt like how could we have missed this, and how could we have let it get this far? But the thing is, nobody ever thinks that your kid is going to have an eating disorder, and nobody ever thinks that it's going to be a 10-year-old. And I'm telling you, through now 12 years of experience in this realm, I've known kids as young as 5, 6, 7 years old who've been diagnosed with all sorts of eating disorders, including anorexia, which is what my daughter had. So we ended up, again, if I told you the whole long story, it would take this entire hour and a half. So I'm trying to keep it short. But we ended up bringing her to a hospital in Minnesota. As her brain was getting more and more starved, she exhibited extreme behaviors. She had obsessive compulsive behaviors involving rituals of movement. Like she had to go up the stairs. She'd go up 3 stairs, back 2, turn around, do a jig, touch her toes. Everything she did had certain numbers and just rituals. But it involved movement because she also had an extreme exercise compulsion, it's called, which just means basically the eating disorder in her head was telling her that she needed to constantly move, that she was lazy if she wasn't constantly moving and burning energy. And I also want to make it clear that when this started to happen to my daughter, she had no idea what was going on. She never went into this intending to lose weight, intending to be thin, quote unquote. She didn't even know what a calorie was. Eating disorders are caused by a negative energy balance. And we will go into this when I do my slides. So she had OCD behavior, severe anxiety, severe depression, suicidality. She talked about what dress she would like me to bury her in. She said the only way she'd ever be free from her eating disorder was if she was dead, that's what it told her. She had auditory hallucinations, like I said, where she described it as a mean man's voice. And that was her eating disordered voice, her thoughts in her head. She also had visual hallucinations of a black mass, and she would cower in the corner of her bedroom and just scream at me, "Can't you see it? Can't you see it? It's right over there." The blackness, it was absolutely terrifying. She was just very, 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 very mentally ill, very, very sick. And I really thought my child was gone. I didn't know that I'd ever get her back. It was so terrifying. It was truly like like a possession, like you see in the movies. Like I thought her head was going to spin. It was really, really scary. She would never sit down because that was lazy, quote unquote. She would, watch TV standing up, do her homework standing up, would never relax and never be able to sit down. So we took her to a hospital in Minnesota, and she was there for 27 days. And to be honest, it was a bit of a nightmare. And we ended up bringing her home, and we had discovered during that time a group of people through a website called Feast, which was a forum of parents with kids with eating disorders, run by a woman named Laura Collins. And I found that website, and it changed my life because I started to become empowered, and I started to learn truths about eating disorders and about how you can refeed a kid at home and all the different strategies to use. So when we got home, we put more weight on my daughter in the first 10 days than they had the entire month that she was inpatient. Their caloric needs are astronomical. She ended up needing 6,000 calories a day for 3 years. I did not just say that incorrectly, 6,000. It was kind of like she was an Olympic athlete. Their metabolism gets to get very hyper metabolic. And so once their body and brain gets what they need, and there's so much internal repair going on, and then she started to grow. So she grew 9 inches, went through full puberty, and doubled her body weight in those 3 years. And I had to feed her like my grandma fed men who worked on her farm in 1950, her dairy farm, like tons of fats, carbs, protein. It was relentless. Had to go eat at school with her every day for about 2.5 years. And I will talk more about how I got the school to help me with that in a minute. But anyway, it was very traumatic. She ended up also getting bullied by other girls, bullied online, people telling her she was getting fat, that they were watching her eat and she was eating too much. And some of the kids were really relentless and cruel. So she went through that, got through that, had a few years of, making poor choices, getting caught sneaking out at night, things like that when she was 13, 14. But by the time she was 15, about 14 and a half, 15, she started to get in a pretty solid recovery. And that's what I also want you guys to understand, is that a recovery from an eating disorder is not simply a weight or a number, or if they've lost weight, getting back to a certain weight. That's not how this works. It takes many years of being very persistent, consistent, and vigilant in getting food in all day, every day, because food is their medicine. It's no different than being diabetic and needing insulin. My daughter needed food and she needed it 6 times a day for many years. But she's now in full recovery. She's 22 years old. She's in graduate school. She's a musician. She has a band. She's released 4 albums. She just got a gig at a place called 7th Street Entry, First Avenue in Minneapolis. Think Prince, it's a very big deal. So she is flourishing and thriving and doing fantastic. But it was an epic battle that I wish upon no one. So if you have questions about anything I've said so far, you can ask them in the chat, and the woman running this will ask me the questions at the end. So I want to go into my slideshow here, eating disorders in children and teens. And when I originally put this together, it's geared more towards school staff, but I'm going to just tweak kind of the way I talk about it for parents. Okay, so what is an eating disorder? They are serious genetic, biological, brain-based illnesses with a psychological component that seems to be tied to temperament. Like I said, a lot of these kids are very type A people pleasers. They're often very incredibly intelligent, gifted, artistic kids. It's very common also in kids with autism, kids who have anxiety and other mental illness disorders. They're all kind of interconnected. So they're triggered by a period of negative energy balance or unstable nutrition that may or may not result in weight loss. Many begin with a diet and many do not. This is key, okay? Again, the stereotype of that this is intentional, that the people who have eating disorders do this on purpose, want to be sick is not true. A lot of times they start with a stomach bug, surgery, getting your wisdom teeth out, training for races and sports, nutrition education in schools, which was a big trigger for my daughter. These are all common triggers. Things like if you have a kid in wrestling who has to lose weight to make weight class, like things like that. They're not disorders of choice, vanity, or family dysfunction. Eating disorders occur across all genders, ethnic backgrounds, socioeconomic lines, people of all ages, and they've been present in all cultures throughout history. While comorbids frequently exist, like I said, like depression, anxiety, OCD, that doesn't make them causal. So eating disorders are treatable with early aggressive intervention. You can fully recover from an eating disorder. You do not have to live a life on the edge of battling an eating disorder forever, which is also a stereotype. People think that once you have an eating disorder, that's going to be your whole life, and it's not true. You can fully recover. So here's the common types of eating disorders. Binge eating disorder, which is more common than HIV and schizophrenia combined, and affects 3.5% of women, 2% of men in their lifetimes. Now, these are all, based on people who are actually diagnosed and get treatment. There are way more, the statistics are much higher in reality, because there are so many people who go undiagnosed and untreated, specifically men and males, because again, the stereotype is that it's females. So men often go longer before having intervention, and boys. Bulimia affects somewhere between 3 and 4.6% of women, 0.1 to 0.5% of men. ARFID, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. This is what they call, a lot of people will call it picky eating. Well, it's not picky eating. This is a form of an eating disorder. This is different than this when it becomes the extreme where the kid is malnourished. And a lot of times the kids are on the spectrum with this, like over 20% are often on the autism spectrum. Anorexia nervosa is the most deadly of all mental illnesses. And between 1 to 2% of females and 0.3% of males will develop anorexia in their lifetime. And this is a key, up to 20% will die. This is the deadliest mental illness behind opioid addiction and opioid overdose. Okay, so that's really important to understand. 9 truths about eating disorders. So the truth one, many people with eating disorders look healthy, but are extremely ill. This is really important. You might hear a term called atypical anorexia. All atypical anorexia means is that the person is not grossly underweight. You can be obese and have anorexia. You can be obese and have anorexia and die. You do not have to be a stick thin skeleton to die from an eating disorder. People with bulimia, often when they die, it's because of cardiac events due to issues with potassium and other electrolytes, etc. Again, you cannot tell by looking at somebody whether they have an eating disorder or not, or how severe their eating disorder is or not. That's super important. Also, because when you know people who have eating disorders or who have loved ones with eating disorders, if they were underweight, once they gain back that weight, everyone thinks, well, they gained all the weight back, they must be better. Their eating disorder must be better. And it is so not true. It is not true at all. That is only part of the process. Okay. That's just one part of a very long marathon. It's a roller coaster, many ups, many downs. Families are not to blame, and they can be the patient and provider's best allies in treatment. What I battled 10, 11, 12 years ago is very different than now, thank God. But even 10, 12 years ago, this was very much blamed specifically on mothers, and that, you must have a bad relationship with your child, or that you talked bad about your body your whole life, or whatever all those stereotypes are. And it's absolutely not true. It's nobody's fault. Nobody chooses this. Frankly, if it was, then we'd all have them, because we are all inundated all day, every day with messages from the media, from the government, from schools about obesity, right? And about nutrition and all the fad diets and the Noom and all of these things. They are biologically influenced illnesses. Like I said, they affect all genders, all races, ethnicities. They have increased risk for suicide and other medical complications. Genes and environment play an important role in the development of them. Genes alone don't predict who will get them. We have very little science behind investigating eating disorders. And luckily, things are starting to change now. So we're starting to learn a lot more. Full recovery is possible. Early detection and intervention are important. So here's some just eating disorder statistics for you. 30 million people suffer from eating disorders in the US. Every 62 minutes, someone dies as a direct result of an eating disorder. They have the second highest death rate of all illnesses, again, behind opioid addiction. 13% of women over 50 engage in eating disordered behaviors. Rates of eating disorders are higher amongst the LGBTQ community as well as the military. 1 in 5 deaths related to anorexia are by suicide. 1 in 10 bulimia and binge eating disorder patients have also a substance abuse problem. It's common to have multiple interacting issues. 3 to 5% of children have ARFID. More boys than girls have avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. Males represent about 25% of anorexia patients, and they're more likely to die, again, because of a delay in treatment, because of the false assumption that boys don't get eating disorders. Also, having a first-degree relative with an eating disorder increases your risk by up to 12 times, because it's also very genetic. So my other 2 children are at very high risk for developing an eating disorder. I also have many cousins, first cousins with eating disorders in my family, like severe eating disorders. So it runs in families, which is often also the case with depression, anxiety, and other mental illnesses. Again, we're kind of still in our infancy of understanding the human brain, really. So more statistics. Anorexia is the third most common chronic illness in adolescents. They affect the military at a rate of 6 times the civilian population. The mortality rate associated with anorexia is 12 times higher than the death rate associated with all other causes for death for females age 15 to 24. That's a very poignant statistic. They have the second highest death rate. I've already said that. They're much more likely to die from suicide than their peers. And this slide is, a few years old, but the number of children under the age of 12 admitted to the hospital for eating disorders rose 119% in less than a decade. Well, that is blown out of the water now, especially with COVID. A lot of kids developed eating disorders during COVID. Type 2 diabetes versus risk of developing eating disorder. So we're always, constantly inundated by this anti-obesity message, and that, the United States has this horrible problem with childhood obesity. And I'm not discounting that there are some issues with that, but again, the messaging and the way it's given to kids actually can put them at a high risk for eating disorders. So a child is 242 times more likely to get an eating disorder than type 2 diabetes. Yet parents are constantly encouraged to police their kids' food, enforce strict diet rules, label foods as good and bad, give food morality, in other words, and worry about them becoming fat. The problem is, again, that these are the very behaviors that put kids at risk to develop an eating disorder who already have the predisposition and the genetics. Okay, this is important. So there was a study called the Anorexia Nervosa Genetics Initiative. It was started in 2013. They took 17,000 individuals who had anorexia at some point in their lives. And they did a study and compared it with 55,500 controls from 17 countries. And the results were really interesting. 8 regions of the genome were found that were significantly associated with anorexia. And the most intriguing one had to do with metabolic dysfunction, which makes total sense once you've gone through this. Like I said earlier, their metabolism goes crazy, and first they get hypometabolic. In other words, their body knows that it's going into starvation mode, so it does everything it can to try to protect internal organs, the heart, liver, kidneys, brain. So then once you start refeeding them and getting food back into their body, then their metabolism reverses and it goes into high gear and they get very hypermetabolic. And that's why it requires such high amounts of calories and fats and high weight gain to get them into recovery. So that's now anorexia is considered a metabopsychiatric disorder, which really empowers us as parents with kids with eating disorders, again, to know that this is a disease, it is highly genetic, and we don't understand a lot about it, but this is no one's fault and no one chooses it. So normally I would show you a video with a family explaining their experience with an eating disorder, but again, they're gonna send that to you afterwards because we had some issues. Sorry about that. So let's talk about student athletes. Though most athletes with eating disorders are female, male athletes are also at high risk, especially everyone competing in sports that tend to emphasize diet, appearance, size, and weight. So weight class sports like wrestling, rowing, horse racing, aesthetic sports like bodybuilding, gymnastics, diving, figure skating. About 33% of males and 62% of females show signs of disordered eating, and these athletes are 8 times more likely to incur injury. And I've seen that a lot with helping parents when their kid is diagnosed. A lot of times with high-level athletes, they're breaking bones, they're straining things, they're tearing ligaments at an abnormally high rate. And those can be signs that something's not right when their body is, starting to get injured much easier than they should. Prevalence of eating disorders are higher in sports like swimming and running, focusing on individual times because the person is trying to beat themselves and compete against themselves. Different than being in a team sport. College athletic trainers, only 27% felt confident identifying an athlete with ED, but despite this, 92% reported dealing with an athlete with an eating disorder. So a lot of coaches at, in your kids' schools, trainers, they don't have any experience with being educated about eating disorders and how to handle that with the kids that are on their teams, et cetera. And it's really important that they understand that. So in this little statistic here, 7% of 4 to 8-year-olds, 15% of 9 to 13-year-olds, and up to 20% of 14 to 18-year-olds skip lunch on any given day at school. And my daughter, and I bet all of your kids, if you ask them, can attest to this. A lot of kids are skipping meals at school, or they're getting, a candy bar and a can of pop, and they are not getting the nutrition that they need, not only for their brain to function to learn, but also for all of their enormous after school activities that require a huge amount of energy. A lot of kids are not getting the food that they need to replace the amount of calories and energy that they're burning in their sports and in their practices. So signs to watch out for in your kids. Just a second here. So weight loss, although not always present, with my daughter, we didn't necessarily notice a weight loss up front, but we did notice her sort of starting to thin out, if you will. Like we thought she's kind of getting more chiseled, more muscular, because she was doing, again, all these crunches and jumping jacks and constantly moving. But so weight loss isn't always the first thing, the first behavior. Okay, weight loss comes later, specifically with anorexia. Throwing away excessive food, not eating lunch, again, not eating any special treats. If they have a special day at school where there's cookies and cupcakes, not participating in that. Frequent trips to the bathroom, either to do secret exercise or to purge, which means to, vomit. Isolating from peers, pulling away from social interaction. New obsession with food, recipes, and baking shows, which I can tell you my daughter did. She was constantly talking about food and about the things she wanted to bake and cook, but then would bake them and not eat them. She'd want everybody else to eat them, but then she wouldn't eat them. Now that's abnormal. That's not normal. Increase with anxiety, signs of depression, sleep issues, obsessive compulsive behaviors, calorie counting, weighing, measuring. If you have a middle school or high school child who is counting calories, who has a Fitbit, is counting steps, is tracking what they're eating, those are all incredibly dangerous things to be doing and can definitely trigger eating disorders. And in the elementary school aged kids, they can't hide it as well as the older kids. So some early warning signs in kids are constantly complaining about stomach aches or having a fear of stomach aches, aversions to tastes and textures and different types of food that they haven't had before, tantrums about, I don't want this for dinner, I'm not going to eat this. And again, not just like a normal reaction, something that really makes you do a gut check of what is going on. This is not normal. Excessive bowel movements, diarrhea, GI issues in general, And they can have some worry about body image, being fat, etc. Also, thinning of hair. You might see fine little downy hair growing on their body. That's called lanugo. Babies are born with that. And it's something that the body does when the body's trying to protect itself and trying to maintain heat. So you'll see that in later stages of malnutrition. And delay in puberty. If your daughter is 12, 13 years old and is not start getting breasts and starting to develop and getting a period, and yes, that can happen. Some kids don't get it till later normally, but delayed puberty is definitely a red flag. Also, falling off their growth curve, which I've been trained to look at growth curves of kids with eating disorders. And very often I'll look at a growth curve of, say, a 14-year-old child. And there's been at least 1, 2, 3 times in their entire life that they fell off their growth curve. So in other words, they grew 3 inches, but they only gained 3 pounds, or they grew 3 inches and they didn't gain, or they only grew an inch in a year and a half and they lost weight. Things like that. Your child in general should stay on the same curve. So, if you see a big increase in height, but the weight remains the same or is falling off that curve, that's a red flag. Kids should never lose weight, never lose weight. Unless you have an extremely obese child who is under the care of a physician, there's no reason for any child to ever lose weight or to ever diet. And that's a message that we get crammed down our throats constantly. So I went over most of these here. Again, menstrual irregularities too in older teenagers. If they stop getting a period, this is a common sign, especially in athletes. A girl should not lose her period while in sports. That's a sign of malnutrition. The body shuts down everything it can, again, to try to protect internal organs. This is important to know. The dry weight of the brain, it's 60% fat. 2/3 of a human brain is fat, and 20% is called DHA, which forms the protective sheath on neurons. That's made of fat. That's why fat is such a critical component in our diet. Why you see, on these shows like Alone or like, Naked and Afraid, in those shows, why they're constantly talking about fat, because fat is the most important component of nutrition for the human brain and for the human body. It's got the most energy as well. If your kid's feeling cold all the time, their fingers get blue when, easily. Again, the body is trying to keep blood pumping to the internal organs. So fingers and toes get less blood. Those are common symptoms. Hair loss. In ARFID, they often have a fear of choking or vomiting. Okay, so here I want to go into a little bit more about things that are dangers in schools, okay? So students trust teachers, and when a teacher tells them like, this is the way to be healthy, in the eating disorder world, the word healthy is fraught with danger, right? Because what's healthy for one person may not be healthy for another person. And kids specifically with eating disorders, what's healthy for them is a high calorie, high fat diet with little exercise, at least in the beginning. So it goes contrary to, again, what's mainstream considered healthy. So when part of an assignment is to like log food, track exercise, do a food journal, look at calorie counts, look at the displays on packaging, those who are prone to eating disorders those are triggers for them. They are very high risk. They can develop rigid and unhealthy food and exercise regimes, and feeling of guilt and shames begin to rise if a child eats food that was labeled unhealthy. They may be preoccupied with their body, weight, and exercise, obsessive thoughts about healthy eating, and then they've developed these compensatory behaviors, exercise, extreme, food restriction, fasting, purging, laxative use, cutting out food groups like cutting out dairy, cutting out gluten, becoming vegetarian, going vegan. And I am not telling you that it's bad to be a vegetarian. I was a vegetarian for a lot of my life, and I still mainly eat vegetarian. But when a child is already restricting and they're having these behaviors, and then they want to go vegetarian, and then often they want to go vegan, that's dangerous. They are restricting by cutting out food groups. So this is very common, a very common thing that I've seen with the hundreds and hundreds of people I've talked to over the years, is a child who starts to cut out food, starts to, have issues, and then they decide to go vegan, which can be deadly. Any focus on numbers in relation to food or exercise or weight puts students predisposed to eating disorders at risk. Again, Fitbits, trackers. I know a lot of people think that, we're doing such a great thing by giving a kid a Fitbit for Christmas, but all studies are showing that, again, these are very dangerous, risky things for kids and teenagers to have, especially kids predisposed to obsessive thoughts and to eating disorders. So now I would normally show you a video called Poodle Science, which I really beg you all to watch. And you can also watch this with your kids. It explains that humans are like dogs. Some are Chihuahuas, some are Great Danes. Everybody's going to develop at different times. Some kids go through puberty early, some kids go through it late. It is totally normal and common for kids to gain weight before they have their huge growth spurt, to kind of, get a little bit round. And that's totally normal. So children don't need to be taught or to understand full nutrition. Their brains are not ready for the science of it, or to understand the behaviors of it. Children need to be provided access to a variety of food and safe, secure, affirming environment. We have to model flexibility, openness, and neutrality. Again, foods aren't good or bad. Food is food. They give you different levels of energy. They all contain calories, which is all energy. They have to be able to trust that their caregivers will be responsive to their body's needs without judgments or condition. They don't need to know whether cheese or French fry are good or bad. And I'm going to get into this more in a minute. Dieting is a huge risk factor for an eating disorder. And the younger a person starts dieting, the more likely they are to develop an eating disorder. So I remember my first diet. I don't know if all of you do, but it was when I was 14, and I was not overweight whatsoever. I was a super active, super athletic kid. And my dad said, "You want to go on this diet with me? That's called the broccoli hot dog diet." And I was like, "Yeah, sure." So I ate broccoli and hot dogs. Like, that's all I ate for like a week. And I felt like crap. And I, of course, didn't stick to it. Thank God. But frankly, my dad is very lucky, because we have such strong genetics in my family, that didn't trigger me into developing a full-blown eating disorder, which wouldn't have been my dad's fault, mind you. Okay, because again, we've all been fed all of this our whole lives about how we all have to be on a diet, and thin is best and fat is bad, etc. So kids in the age range of puberty, they're going through the biggest time of growth of their life since infancy, and they have to morph into a man and a woman. And to do this takes a massive amount of energy. So the average girl will gain 40 to 50 pounds during puberty and grow up to 10 inches. And for boys, it's 50 to 60 pounds and grow 12 inches a foot. So my son, when he was 14, he was considered overweight, and he was about 5'2". And in the next 2.5 years, he grew a foot, ended up 6'2", and he is a big dude and he required tons of calories to do that, and just sprouted up and grew big and tall and into a man. So what teachers and staff can do, and also parents, what I want you to understand is you need to recognize that food doesn't have moral value. Kids shouldn't be taught foods are good or bad. Some offer more nutritional value, but all food has a purpose. It's about balance and moderation, right? So I always tell people, you probably shouldn't have a cupcake for breakfast every day of the week. But on the occasional Saturday, if grandma shows up with donuts and cupcakes, go for it. Have a donut for breakfast, right? Food also should be fun and it's social. It's part of the joy of life. Food should not be shown to be our enemy or good or bad or have morality. Focusing on intuitive eating, listening and honoring fullness and hunger cues. Sometimes kids are starting growth spurts and they need a ton of food. And when they go for seconds of dinner and a parent says, you've had enough, that can, send a message to them that they're bad, that they shouldn't honor these hunger cues. And we have to be very careful, again, with our messaging. Not using external tools, online apps, again, food journaling, tracking devices, Fitbits. Focus on reducing size bias rather than reducing weight. In other words, health at every size, like that poodle video I want you all to watch, that every kid's different, every body's different. And considering our own biases and beliefs is really, really important. And this is really, really hard. It's very difficult as a parent and a teacher to look in the mirror at your own issues about weight and about body, and to, be able to recognize your own biases, etc., towards fat. Okay. So we need staff at schools to listen to us parents. It is a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week, full-time job to help a child refeed in an eating disorder and then get into full recovery. And it's a long process that takes several years. And we need a lot of support and help for our kids to be able to be successfully back in school. So things like having a quiet, safe, private space for a kid to eat lunch and snacks with a parent, if the parent is able. If parents, some parents of kids with eating disorders are single parents. They have no support, they have no help. They have to keep working to maintain health insurance, etc. So sometimes they'll, need a 504 plan, an IEP, where they can train a school professional, an aide, anyone who's willing, a secretary in an office, to possibly eat with the child if the parent is not able to. This is really, really important, because kids in the early stages of treatment for an eating disorder, they cannot eat on their own. They cannot eat on their own. They need one-to-one supervision. So we need to, be paying attention to behaviors. You need to talk to your kids' teachers. If you're concerned about behaviors you're seeing, touch base with teachers. Hey, I'm seeing some of these concerning things at home. Are you noticing any behaviors with my child? Asking for teachers and staff to allow extra time for assignments, extra time for, they're going to miss more school than the average kid. Often a kid with an eating disorder can appear to be functioning well at school, but at home, it's just an absolute disaster. They can pull it together sometimes at school and with other people, but they're still very, very ill in their heads from the eating disorder. Also, it's not a place for anybody in a school to be talking to your child about their eating disorder. or giving praise or telling them they look good or they look healthy. They need to be not commenting at all on your child's appearance ever. What teachers and adults say to kids matter. Just eat. Why can't you eat? Just eat like a normal person, or I'll fatten you up. A lot of grandparents don't understand this in the beginning. My own parents said things like that. I've also had people say this to me: I wish I could have a little bit of that anorexia, just a little bit. I'm telling you, you don't. You don't want this. You don't want to have to eat 6,000 calories a day and be full like it's Thanksgiving every minute of your life, to battle that malnutrition. People say really insensitive things. I know they mean well sometimes, but it can be really dangerous. Or if you think you're fat, then you must think I'm huge. People talking about their own bodies. Language, body positivity matters. So when a kid says, is ice cream bad for you? Instead of saying, yes, ice cream is unhealthy for you, you want to say all food has energy. Some foods have different amounts. Our bodies need it to live. Again, it's okay to have ice cream sometimes. You shouldn't have ice cream for every meal or, every day of the week maybe, but if you're in general eating a good moderated diet and you're getting everything you need, treats and desserts should all be a go. Or, does this make me fat? Well, again, it's like we respect all body sizes. Everybody comes in all shapes and sizes. There's health at every size. The language that you use matters. It matters a lot. We need to not, as parents, be talking about ourselves in negative ways, like, oh my God, I can't wear this swimsuit. I hate my body. Just negative body talk in general is something that we all shouldn't do. And I'm telling you, it's very freeing when you let go of all of this stuff and you never talk about it. And I haven't been weighed in 9 years. I don't know what I weigh. I don't care what I weigh. And I eat what I want when I want, and I do things I like for fun. And my weight has remained very stable, because that's called set point. Everybody's body has a set point that it kind of wants to be at. And the more you battle that with yo-yo dieting, science has shown that the higher you're going to end up weighing, because your body just keeps wanting to gain more weight because it knows that sooner or later you're going to put it in a restricted energy deficit. So it protects itself by gaining more weight. Again, humans come in all shapes and sizes. Health promoting activities that teachers can promote in school and in gym classes is things like yoga, mindfulness, breath work, kicking, jumping, throwing, catching, teamwork. My local teacher that I dealt with a lot right now, he's doing like frisbee golf and biking and ultimate frisbee and doing fun things that are realistic for everyday life that kids can do, and not focusing so much on running and individual times and climbing ropes and things like kind of like the old school stuff that all of us grew up doing, that ends up promoting competition with yourself, if that makes sense. So again, teaching moderation. Food doesn't have a moral value. I like this slide a lot. These are all good foods. Look, there's pizza, there's avocados, there's donuts, there's watermelon and apples and kiwi. It's all good food. Bad foods are rotten, spoiled foods, foods you're allergic to or intolerant to, food that calls you names at recess, which everybody always gets a little chuckle out of. So here's an example of 504 plans. Excused kids from physical education according to their needs. My daughter was excused from Phy-Ed and recess for about 1.5 years. She went to help the art teacher instead. I know sometimes there are specific requirements from a state level that they have to fill these different requirements. but schools need to be able and willing to work with you to find alternate lessons, maybe to be able to take PE online, or push it off for a couple years or whatever you need, because kids who are in recovery from eating disorders absolutely cannot participate and should not participate in physical education, also in any curriculum involving nutrition, involving anything having to do with numbers, calories, all of those things. Allowing alternate lunch locations, whether that be with a parent in a car, or the kid gets to go home for lunch, or you find a safe private place to eat at school, which is what I did. They were wonderful with me. They had a room for me every day. I'd go there, I'd meet my daughter for lunch, or the last year I trained in an AmeriCorps worker, and the rules were, you know, no garbage cans, no napkins, and she couldn't wear a hoodie to be able to hide food. So I trained this woman in to know the tricks and the trades of ED, but her job was also to just treat my daughter like a normal kid and watch YouTube videos and talk about Taylor Swift and whatever. And if my daughter did not complete her lunch, she was to call me, and then I would come to school and pick up my daughter and bring her home. And that was the deal that we had. And then I would text a picture and quantity of food to the secretary in the morning, have my daughter drop her lunch off, have the secretary check her lunch to make sure she hadn't messed with it on the way to school. Allowing extra time for homework, things like that. No bathroom use during class, bathroom before lunch, not immediately after. Allowing morning and afternoon snacks. My daughter's teacher in 5th grade was amazing. When she got back from the hospital, she just instituted a snack time for the entire class. So my daughter didn't have to be the only one and didn't have to be sort of pointed out. And again, understanding that siblings of kids with EDs are at 12 times higher risk of developing them. So you also may want to consider having siblings of your child excused from different portions of a nutrition, health class. So some of the best resources to educate yourself and others I have here. Brave Girl Eating is a great book written by Harriet Brown. That book has been really important for me in giving to like friends and family, to try for them to get a synopsis of understanding what it's like on a daily basis to save your child from an eating disorder. Again, I don't have enough time right now to really get you to understand how hardcore this was. I slept with my daughter for a year to keep her from exercising at night. My entire life consisted of grocery shopping, cooking, cleaning, and eating with my daughter. That's all I did for a solid year. And then after that, it was, another 2.5 years again of 6 meals a day, 3 meals, 3 snacks, making sure that she was gaining appropriately for growth and combating any behaviors. Eating with Your Anorexic by Laura Collins is an incredible book. Decoding Anorexia, this Eva Musby book, these other ones. This one, When Your Teen Has an Eating Disorder by Lauren Mulheim. I was actually interviewed for that book as well as for the Eva Musby book, and I have several quotes in there. And I'm not telling you that to, talk myself up or sound conceited. I want you to just know that your best resource when your kid is diagnosed with an eating disorder are other parents, lived experience, people who have done the nitty gritty. Because if you have never lived this, you truly cannot understand what it's going to take to get your child into recovery. Feasted.org is an incredible resource, nationaleatingdisorders.org. Here's my contact information. I'm always willing to help families facing an eating disorder, and I have a lot of connections with a lot of people, frankly, all over the entire world, because I'm involved in a lot of international groups. And I am always happy to help connect you with resources. I wish that what exists now would have existed for us 12 years ago. I only had, Feast was about the only thing, thank God, but now there are a ton more resources, and I can connect you with the right help. So anyway, that's the end of that part of my presentation. Are there any questions?
Katie, thank you. Would you do me a favor, Katie, and actually go ahead and put the last slide, your contact information, so people could just be able to take
Yeah,
note of that.
there you
Thank
go.
you. So Katie, I wanted to let you know, actually, we have one of our Fairfax County Public Schools school board members with us today, Melanie Marin. And we had some questions in the chat regarding PE and some other things. And actually, if it's okay with you, I'm actually going to let Melanie chat with our audience today, and then we'll get to some other questions. So
Sure.
Melanie, if you want to unmic, we'd be
Sure.
happy to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Katie, for this education. I don't know if people have their screens on. I see the slides, so I don't know if everyone's camera ready. I just jumped on. So I'm here today because of one of my constituents and friends who's also on the call, who has had just an experience, it sounds like similar to Katie's, with her daughter. And so I wanted to learn more. And I'm also a parent. I have a 7th grade daughter and a 4th grade son. And I represent most of the Madison Pyramid and the South Lakes Pyramid, but really, this issue is important for all of our students. So I wanted to share a few things, maybe not direct answers to the questions. I just want to pull those up in the chat. But I wanted to share that being here today is such an important thing for you. So many times people ask me for help, but really the best thing you can do is to just be connected with your child, see if they're struggling, and then that school connection. And a lot of times the resources, the path towards resources can start with your school. And the Parent Resource Center certainly has, all these resources as well. The questions, that I wanted to share, a big part of what the school division is doing now when it comes to social and emotional learning, or SEL, that has really blossomed after, being apart during COVID, and really focusing on students' mental health and well-being and healthy strategies and mindfulness. And so increasing awareness of students, ability to, kind of metacognitively understand how they regulate what they're feeling, how they express that. So when you hear that social emotional learning, I think that's a big tie into this, into helping equip our students with, knowing how to be well in their mind and body. And so we do see, more yoga programs and more other, other types of programs. When it comes to health and PE, which is, explicit in our middle and high schools, I have questions now after today about how we're teaching about eating disorders, because Katie, I certainly came into this call today with that 1990s Beverly Hills 90210 thinking of what anorexia is. Although I do have a lifelong friend who has had bulimia. And so I've learned from her, and I was chatting with my friend here today about, seeing her, be successful. But I think it's similar to, for me, and how perhaps if some of you have been helping your students recently, like with their math learning, like it's taught totally different than how we learned it, right? Or like, Pluto used to be a planet and now it's not. I think this is another one of those really watershed pieces of information that I want to be sure that parents know, because I can even remember thinking back to, to the baby groups, my kids were in, and some parents just having such a hard time feeding their, not just babies, but toddlers and elementary school kids. And I just wonder, in the way that we've seen rises in ADHD identification and autism spectrum, do we, are we seeing it more because we're learning more, there's more data? So I just, my big takeaway from this today is ensuring that in our school division, in our curriculum, and in the information that parents get and that our counselors have, that, this is different than that 1990s after school special understanding. So I am going to take that forward, and I am going to look at our FCPS curriculum when it comes to that health and PE. I also wanted to mention something came up about bathroom use. And this year, for you middle school and high school parents, you might be aware that there's been this implementation of a an app called eHall Pass, which is requiring students to sign up to use the bathroom. And it's the number one issue I've heard about next to safe transit to schools this fall. And there's a lot of questions. I don't know anyone who's happy with it. It was set up to help teachers in monitoring behavior and knowing where kids are and just not to be interrupted in the classroom. But this is something that I know I'm advocating for. I know the superintendent is concerned about it. So if that's something that you are aware is an issue, I urge you to give that feedback to your child's principal, because I think the more the principals hear that this is a concern, some students, they're holding, they're not going to the bathroom during the day. So I just wanted to address that. So I don't want to steal any more thunder, but I did just want to share those perspectives. And the one last thing I wanted to share was actually last night at our board meeting, we recognized Inova staff, our major health partner here, for their work in the community. And, I advocated hard during 2021 to have a staff member in central office who has a master's in public health, an MPH, primarily because of what we had been through with COVID. But now I am, I want that person to have this connection into our, these public health issues. And so I'm following up with that person in the staff and Inova and making those connections, because we have this world-class health system. And what are we doing to make sure that if our school system can't support students with this need, that we turn to our community health partners, because our mission is to educate kids, but kids can't learn if they're not well. But we need to turn to those partners to help with that work. So so I'll leave it at that. I don't believe I saw the questions, because I just was planning to be more of a participant. But I certainly will follow up with FCPS staff on this call and bring those questions to that staff member. Her name is Sarai Smalls, who has that Master's of Public Health, to make sure that those questions are being answered.
Can I say
So I hope
something?
that's helpful.
Melanie, thank you.
Thank you so much. You made me think of a couple of things I wanted to say as well, is that I've given this presentation now to several schools and to the staff of schools. And I have to tell you, I have had so many teachers and coaches come up to me afterwards crying or wanting to talk to me privately, who are like, oh my God, like light bulbs are going off and I need to change how I am teaching nutrition, how I am teaching, like I had a gym teacher who was also a coach, who was like, I need to sit my cross country team down after school and I need to talk to them about proper fueling for the sport. I need to start, making it mandatory that everybody brings a really great snack to have before practice or after practice or whatever. I had a health teacher who was requiring kids to do food journals and to, write down everything. And I was like, I understand that you have to do this for the state the requirements, but I was like, here's an option. You could do an example of Jane Doe, right? This is what Jane Johnson ate today, and just give a general synopsis, not with, exact numbers, etc., but just to make it that all 30 kids in the class are just looking at this one thing. They're not looking at their own food diary and comparing it to Susie sitting next to them and Johnny sitting over here. And this girl is, a foot taller and 50 pounds heavier. And this boy is a little tiny kid, etc. So altering just the language and the verbiage and altering how you go about giving the message of health and nutrition without making it, triggering it in these kids and making it very much about the individual person, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely, Katie. Thank you for that insight.
Yeah.
So we have a few questions from the rest of our audience. One parent has shared that she herself had been diagnosed with anorexia at age 14. But her question really is around her daughter, who is currently 9, and she said little chubby. She's active with a healthy appetite. but her pediatrician, and apparently several different ones, have counseled her about the weight. How can I talk to her about maintaining a healthy weight without causing an eating disorder?
My simple answer
Hmm.
in brutal honesty is you don't. You don't talk to your daughter about her weight ever at all. You don't talk about numbers. You don't talk about her weight. And frankly, I would educate your own healthcare providers about the risks and dangers genetically of having a child with an eating disorder. When you've had your own eating disorder, this is a very highly genetic. And in them talking to your child about their weight, they are opening Pandora's box. I frankly, this may sound harsh, but if I had providers who were unwilling to learn about eating disorders and the current science of eating disorders, I would fire them and I would go find somebody who is willing and who does understand. Because again, my son was a very heavy kid. And he, I got that talk from my doctors about him too. And we never ever pointed it out to him. We didn't never put him on a diet. We just tried to lead by example and, go do things as a family, etc. And he grew a foot and he thinned out. And this is normal. We have made puberty like 9 years old, your kid may very well be getting ready to go through puberty and it's huge growth spurt, like my daughter. And we've sort of made puberty like, what's the word I'm trying to think of? Like we don't understand that it's normal for these kids to pudge out before they grow up.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
So, yeah.
So another parent is asking around any recommendations around prevention when their specific child has a medically restricted diet due to things like if they're gluten-free, if they're, what might be some supports there, Katie?
Can you read the first part of the question again?
Or just any recommendations around kind of, helping with eating disorder prevention when their child has a medically restricted diet?
Well, I would say, so again, it's really important that you make sure your child is getting enough fats. That's really important. Whether, if they have a dairy allergy or if they have celiac or whatever, you just have to find different ways to get that fat in, which is really important, especially again, if, in vegetarian and vegan diets, to get the appropriate fats in. Also, if you have a child with a disease or a severe allergy or whatever, is to maybe search out a dietitian who is trained correctly in eating disorders. And I would look for somebody who's been trained in what's called family-based treatment. That is the cutting edge, top of the line eating disorder treatment in the world. And I'm warning you that not all providers are created equally. Frankly, most, and I'm married to a doctor and I'm a nurse, so I feel like I can say this, like, don't fall victim to white coat syndrome, because we get pretty much little to no education on eating disorders in our schooling, nor do dietitians. So you have to be cognizant of that when you're dealing with providers. But I think it's just mainly making sure your kid's getting enough fats, getting enough calories, and that they're staying on their growth curve.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
Can you speak to when a child's weight and food choices are causing a health issue? Like, for example, this parent says high triglycerides.
Say that again, you broke up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you speak to when a child's weight and food choices are causing a health issue, like high triglycerides?
Well, again, this is like, for this question, I would say you need to meet with a dietitian, with a pediatrician who understands both, the medical aspects of your situation, but who also understands eating disorders and disordered eating, and how to best approach that by, I mean, I guess, how do I word this simplistically? It's all about the messaging from both healthcare providers and parents of, instead of being like, you can't eat that because that has too much fat and you have high triglycerides and that whatever, it's, honey, maybe on tomorrow we can go to the store and we can buy stuff to make some your favorite, I don't know, zucchini bread or whatever, and that would be awesome. But not, it's about the verbiage you use and the language you use, that this is, we need to make sure that your body's getting what it needs without vilifying certain foods or fats. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense, Katie.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So another parent is asking about a child who really only will eat junk food, and that's in quotes. It is a fight to have them eat a variety of foods or things that their body, I guess that their body would need. Is this a red flag combined with weight loss for an eating disorder?
Combined with weight loss?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Anything that involves weight loss, again, in a child or a teenager is a red flag. They shouldn't be losing weight. Again, unless they are like the previous question, right? They're having health issues and triglycerides, or they're diabetic or whatever. That would be definitely very concerning for me. And I would be almost more concerned with that maybe that could be a sign of binging and purging, or even of bulimia. Because, and a lot of times too, when my advice to people in general is when the hair stands up on the back of your neck and you're like, something doesn't feel right, you need to trust that. You got to trust your gut, right? So I would be watching for things like wrappers stuffed under beds and in drawers, or food stashed various places, or, checking bathrooms, checking toilets for signs of purging, things like that, checking knuckles. Kids who purge often have like little scratches and sores on their knuckles. And I'm not trying to scare you, but it could be none of those things, but I would definitely be watching for those behaviors. And with the weight loss, I would definitely want to have maybe a physician involved in that. But again, not a physician who's going to praise weight loss in a child. That's a red flag for me for a physician.
Yeah, thank you. So another parent is asking about her 9-year-old who is just 45 pounds. She's thin, super active, never really had any weight loss, but doesn't necessarily like to eat food. Would that be something, of course, that mom should be concerned about?
I mean, again,
Sorry.
this question's hard to answer. It's like,
Yeah.
Yes and no. Like,
Right.
There's a difference between like picky eating. Some little kids who like kind of subsist on chicken nuggets and boxed mac and cheese and whatever, goldfish crackers. But as kids age and get older, their diet should increase and start to change. So this is a case where also sometimes when I deal with parents with kids who are diagnosed with eating disorders at 10, 11, 12 years old, they do have a history that looks like that. They were very tiny their whole life, didn't have very large of a diet their whole life. And it's kind of like, you guys have all heard the term failure to thrive, right? So it's kind of like that, like that sometimes kids in that situation may have had their growth restricted their entire life. So what happens is when they hit that puberty stage where they need that huge energy source to grow, they don't eat enough and they fall into an energy deficit. And that's when the eating disorder gets triggered. So I again, without knowing your individual kid's life history and their growth curve and everything else, some kids, as I said before, some kids are Chihuahuas, some kids are Mastiffs. It could be perfectly normal, but I'd also be vigilant in watching and making sure that this child is staying on their growth curve and is expanding their diet. And you may want to get some intervention for that. You may want to get a dietitian who understands family-based treatment and is able to help you improve the variety of the food your kid is eating.
No, great. Great. Thank you. That's really good advice. No, really, really appreciate it. I like the word that you use, vigilant,
Yeah.
and finding someone that may be able to support you and give you resources. So thank
Right.
you.
Mhm.
But speaking of resources, we did have a parent ask, would you have any resources on like proper fueling for sports and activities? Is that something maybe you could share with us at the PRC and we could send out to families?
Oh, yeah, I have information on everything and anything. So
I bet you do.
yeah, I
Um,
can send you that as well as a few
okay.
other links. Yes.
No, that would be great. And I did want to share with our participants today that Katie has shared with me a list of really amazing articles that she highly recommends that we also are going to include for everyone. So you'll have an opportunity to read more if you would like to. All right. So let me, I think, Katie, that is the end. We have gone through a lot of our questions. And I would encourage people, if you're interested in talking more with Katie, please do contact her. If you're interested in seeing some of the resources that we have here at the Parent Resource Center, which, by the way, when Katie and I met about a few months ago, she gave me some books and things that she thought would be valuable for our library here, and we have purchased those, and they are in our library. But please do reach out to the Parent Resource Center. We're absolutely able to have a consultation with you, chat with you about what you might need with regard to how you can support your child and in working with your child's school. We certainly appreciate our school board member, Melanie Marin, being here today to give us some insight into what's happening, certainly around social emotional learning and information that she may take back then to the school board. So again, thank you all so very much. And we appreciate your time today. And Katie, thanks again. This was a wonderful presentation
Can I
and
say
we
one
all
last
learned a
thing?
lot. Yes, absolutely.
One last thing is just all of you out there, if you're going to read one thing regarding eating disorders to help you really understand, read Brave Girl Eating by Harriet Brown. That book changed my life. It was like reading my own life in this book. And it really helps you understand the whole process and also to help you support friends and family that you may have that are battling eating disorders. And the best thing that you can do to help them, things like taking their other kids away so that the parents can focus on they're the one kid who needs the help and attention. It's just such a great book. And if you, again, only have time to read that one thing, that's the thing I would recommend.
Great, Katie. Thank you so much. All
You're
right,
welcome.
everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. And we wish everyone well and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.